The most popular translation in the Western world for the non-Muslim audience was actually done by a Jew, Dawood, in 1956. And this is his translation. This is the one that's currently in vogue in American universities, in America, in most Western universities as well. This is the one that's used. When it first came out, it was heavily, seriously criticized, and it had many, many mistakes. And it's clear that the mistakes were deliberate as well. He's a Jew, for example, he translated the term Bani Israel, the children of Israel, as the sons of God. Yeah, children of God. This is how he translated the word Bani Israel. And there's lots of translations like this. And generally, you find, and it's not something I've found in the reviews of Dawood, but when I was reading it, you find that he's tried to make the language of the translation as aggressive as possible. As aggressive. He tried to make it a military language, a warlike language. So wherever he can do, wherever he can get away with it, he's tried to make the language very, very warlike, very, very, very severe. To basically keep up that image that Islam was spread by the sword and so on and so forth. And however, since it's been published, this book has undergone 8 major revisions and lots of minor revisions, 13, 15, lots of different revisions over the years. And now actually, when I was reading it, it's actually, this is a final revised translation. It's actually very good. It's actually a very good translation now. It's still got that nuance where it's very aggressive in the language in some places. But I generally found it a pretty good translation. Its footnotes are very few. And footnotes and comments are very few. And most of the contentious footnotes seem to have been taken out of this latest edition. It's actually sold over 1 million copies. In terms of, that's how popular it is. The next translation, 1977, was the Noble Quran by Hilali and Mohsin Khan, which I talked about it there. Yeah, okay. It was done in 1977, but it only recently came out a few years ago anyway. And this is a translation based upon earlier commentary. So basically this isn't really a translation at all, it's a pure interpretation. I'm sure many of us have seen it. It's very difficult to read because it's full of brackets, explanatory brackets. It's very, very difficult to read. And it is a pure interpretation. The good point, I'm not a great fan of this translation. The good point of this translation is that it's accurate from the point of view of creed. From the point of view of Aqidah, it's a very accurate translation. They haven't made any creedal errors in their translation. So from that, it's a big plus. It is very accurate in its translation in terms of creed. But in terms of the English, I find it very poor. And because of the parentheses, the many brackets, it's very, very difficult to read. The next major translation we have is the translation, and this translation is different from the ones that we discussed so far, in that it is, if you like, a completely new translation, independent work. And it's unique in its unique translation by Muhammad Asad in 1980, and he called it the Message of the Quran. And Muhammad Asad, he is a descendant of a long line of rabbis. And he was an expert in the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. And he converted to Islam in 1926. The problem with Muhammad Asad is that he was very, very strongly influenced by modernist thought. And his translation is heavily influenced by modernist thought. And we can do a case study later on, inshallah, about his translation and the problems it has because of his modernism. And he based his translation entirely upon a commentary of the Quran written by Mu'tazili of the past, Zamakhshari, Kashaf of Zamakhshari. Zamakhshari is a Mu'tazili, and his translation, his tafsir, is a Mu'tazili tafsir, and very strongly emphasizes the linguistic features of the Quran. And because of that strong emphasis of the linguistic features of the Quran, one of the really, really nice points of this translation is its language. It's English language. It's a very beautiful English language. And he's tried to convey the structure of the Arabic in English. And in many cases, he's done quite a good job of it. So in terms of just as a literary piece, purely from a literary aspect, it's very, very nice. It's a very nice read. And you can see some of the Arabic structures coming through in his translation as well. As I said, the problem is his translation, the actual, what he translated. That's where the problem lies, and we'll see some of those problems later on. The next translation that we'll talk about, mention, is by Thomas Irving in 1985. And this was a translation done by an American Muslim, a convert to Islam. He called it the Noble Quran, the Arabic text and English translation. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get hold of this Quran, so I don't know anything, this translation, so I don't know much about it at all. Moving on to more recent times, in 1997 we had a translation, which I know our brother Naif really likes. The translation, the Sahih International Translation by Muhammad. Generally very good, accurate, bit difficult to read in some places, but overall it's a good translation. In 1999, we had the Noble Quran translated by Aisha Bewley and Abdul Haq Bewley. Both of Sufi backgrounds. This was revised in 2005. I don't have the revision, this is the 1999 edition. And they've called it the Noble Quran, a new rendering of its meaning in English. It's based upon all the other translations that I've talked about so far, based upon the Hafs reading, which all of us memorize and read in Arabic. They have based it upon the Warsh reading of the Mus'haf. So their translation is based upon the Warsh reading. So what we find is that the verse numberings are different in some places, and sometimes the person is different. Instead of a third person, a second person, for example. In the introduction, they say it took them 20 years to translate this book. 20 years to translate the Quran. And in my personal opinion, and I stress it's my personal opinion, this is the best translation I've found. It's very, very good. Its English is very nice. Its translation I found very accurate when you're looking at the tafsirs. The bias that you'd expect from the background of these translators is not there at all in any of the verses that I've read, in any of the verses I've seen so far and read of the Quran. You look at verses like dealing with the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and other creedal issues, they're all accurate translations. So I've not found anything that I could really fault in this translation. It is my personal favorite in the modern translations. Sorry? Okay. In 2002, we had the Majestic Quran translated by a group of people, Badawi, Abdul Hakim Murad, etc. Unfortunately, it's out of print, and I've not been able to get hold of a copy of this. But the brothers who have this translation tell me it's very, very nice. But I can't verify or say anything about this translation. The next translation was by Thomas Cleary, 2004, a non-Muslim. His specialization is in different languages, and he's translated lots of religious texts from different faiths. I have it at home. I forgot to bring the translation with me, unfortunately. But you can give this one a miss. It's a complete waste of time. I really didn't like it at all. The language is, it's just, when you read it, it's I don't know what to say. From an academic perspective, it's not very accurate. It doesn't flow very nicely. I think what he's tried to do is he's tried to translate it in the same way and use the same language as he's used for the scriptures of other religions that he's translated previously. And that just doesn't work for the Quran. You can't translate the Quran like you translate the Bible or the Torah or the Hindu scriptures or whatever. It's just too different a book. The thing that Quran translation is missing is that we haven't had a scholar translate the Quran. We haven't had somebody who is studied formally, has studied Islam formally, and is also an expert of the Arabic language, getting English language rather. We haven't had that mix so far. And I recently came across a translation that was done in 2004 by M.A. Abdul Halim, who's actually the professor of Sheikh Haytham in his PhD. So, or who was the professor of Sheikh Haytham in his PhD. And he's translated the Quran, and when I first saw his credentials, I was very, very happy.